The big head coach domino this offseason was Sean Payton. There are a lot of openings, but Payton was the main guy who's had a lot of past success and didn't win a Super Bowl with the Saints. He was expected to be a hot commodity, and that was definitely the case. He interviewed with the Cardinals, Panthers, Texans, and obviously the Broncos. Denver went out and looked into a lot of options. The Broncos interviewed 8 different candidates, and some were some big names too, like Jim Harbaugh and Dan Quinn. Denver actually really wanted DeMeco Ryans, but he wanted to go to Houston, and that left the Broncos with a big decision, and they ended up pulling the trigger, trading for Sean Payton. His rights were still owned by the Saints so New Orleans and Denver did have to find some compensation that was fair, and that ended up being a pretty penny. The Broncos traded a first and second for Payton and a third. Trading for Payton is a big gamble, and Denver definitely needs it to work out, and the good news is he's a proven NFL head coach. Sean Payton was a quarterback back in the day and actually played at Eastern Illinois and ended up playing in the NFL for the Bears during the 1987 strike. He had 8 total completed passes in the league. Payton got into coaching the next year and landed his first job in the pros in 1997 as the Eagles quarterbacks coach. He was briefly the Giants OC and then later on the Cowboys quarterbacks coach. Payton was hired by the Saints in 2006 to be their head coach, and he was there for a long time. There was obviously the 1 year where he coached high school football because he was suspended for Bountygate. By the way, Kevin James crushed that role. But overall, Sean Payton had a very successful 15-year tenure in New Orleans. The Saints won that 2009 Super Bowl, and New Orleans made it to the NFC Championship 3 times under Payton, made the postseason 9 times, and won 10+ games every time. A huge piece to the success of Payton in New Orleans was no doubt Drew Brees. He did have a Hall of Fame quarterback, but Brees wasn't really that guy until he left the Chargers and signed with the Saints. Payton played a huge role in developing Drew Brees and won a lot of games because of it. By far the biggest piece of the hiring of Sean Payton is how it's going to affect Russell Wilson. He was the big ticket item last offseason, and the Broncos ended up getting him, but it came at a pretty hefty price. Denver gave up 2 first-round picks, 2 seconds, a 5th, and 3 players. It was a big swing, and Denver gave Wilson a 5-year, $245 million contract. The Broncos are locked in on him for a while. His deal actually goes through 2028, which is wild. Denver needs to do anything and everything it can to help him succeed. It was a very rough first season for Wilson in Denver. It was the worst year of his career by a good margin, and the Broncos were just terrible. The Broncos not only traded for Wilson last offseason, but ended up hiring Nathaniel Hackett to be their next head coach. Hackett had a previous track record as a great offensive mind. He played a role in Aaron Rodgers winning back-to-back MVPs, and he not only helped the Packers be one of the best offenses in the league, but he did the same thing before in Jacksonville and was the offensive coordinator for that Jaguars team that made it all the way to the AFC Championship. The hire seemed to make some sense, and Hackett felt like it was the right choice. Clearly, that wasn't the case. It was just a disaster, and the Broncos sucked. Denver underperformed in just about every way, and it was pretty obvious that something had to change. After a blowout loss to the Rams on Christmas Day, Hackett was given the worst Christmas present of all, unemployment, and was fired after a 4-11 start. First and foremost, the Broncos need to figure out their offensive line. Injuries ended up being a huge issue all season and hurt just about everywhere on the offense. Tim Patrick tore his ACL before the season even started, and both Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler missed some time. There is absolutely talent there in Denver, but it didn't show out the way it was supposed to. Down the stretch, Wilson did have a nice rapport with tight end Greg Dulcich, so there is some hope going forward there. Javonte Williams was supposed to be that guy at running back, but he tore his ACL. There are plenty of reasons to be very high on the Broncos next season and believe that Denver can turn it around. And the single biggest reason for that is the defense. Denver had one of, if not the best defense in all of football last season. The issue was that the offense couldn't really score any points. There are a lot of just straight up studs on that defensive side of the ball. Randy Gregory is still playing at a very high level, but the best part of that Broncos defensive unit has absolutely been the secondary. And that's because there are 2 of the best players in the league back there. Pat Surtain, and Justin Simmons. If the Broncos can figure things out on the offensive side of the ball, there are some huge reasons to believe that Denver can be a very good football team. How this whole hiring of Payton affects the Saints, I feel has been a bit overlooked in my opinion. It makes sense to look at it in terms of the Broncos and Russell Wilson above all else, but it does affect New Orleans in a big way. Payton announced his retirement from coaching in 2022. There was the belief that he wanted to return to coaching, and that was obviously the case. New Orleans named Dennis Allen as the new head coach, and the Saints still have a long way to go. Jameis Winston is the only quarterback under contract ahead of the 2023 season, but luckily, New Orleans is in an easy spot in the NFC South. That division is by far the worst in the NFL now. Still, the Saints need to rebuild, and stockpiling picks will help. Payton didn't want to continue to coach New Orleans, and it was just better for the Saints to move on and get what they could in return. And getting first and second round picks is big. It feels like a win-win to me, honestly. I do think that this is a home run hire for the Broncos. Sean Payton kind of feels like the figure and the offensive mind that Denver really needed. I know last year was very tough for the Broncos, but I felt like Denver can turn things around for sure. The Broncos got the big fish last offseason, that was Russell Wilson, and I honestly love that move. Wilson has a proven track record and was single-handedly carrying a Seahawks team with a lackluster roster. Now, the roster was bad because Seattle was paying him so much, but the point still stands. He was that good, and last season was such an anomaly. I think moving on to a new team for the first time and getting used to a new system was all maybe a reason for the lack of success. I personally don't think Nathaniel Hackett was that terrible. That offense didn't really have an identity and had plenty of issues, but even when the scheme was good, Wilson wasn't really making the plays. The Broncos got absolutely thrashed by injuries, and the offensive line played musical chairs all season. It was a complete mess, and firing Hackett maybe was needed just to change the culture, or honestly what I think, to find someone to blame for the disappointment. Sean Payton, however, is a well-respected, successful head coach. He has a Super Bowl victory and had a lot of success with Drew Brees. I think that's a big reason why he's been so sought after this offseason. It's hard to find a proven guy like him, and there's a reason he lasted so long in New Orleans. Not to mention, he never even did get fired. This just has to work for the Broncos. Clearly, Denver believed that they were right there, close to being a true contender, and that's why getting a franchise quarterback was so important. I did think Denver was close, but there have been a lot of issues exposed this last season. I don't know if Sean Payton can fix them, but I'd feel pretty good about him being the guy to rely on. The Broncos have given up a lot of their future to get Wilson and Payton together. Combined, the Broncos have traded 3 first-round picks, 3 second-round picks, and 3 players. 6 total picks in the first 2 rounds of the drafts is a crazy amount to give up. Luckily, one of those first-round picks is originally the 49ers. It's a late pick, but it does mean that 2 of those 3 firsts in this upcoming draft were traded. Those selections are picks that can make or break the future of a franchise. And instead, the future of the Denver Broncos is going to have to rely on Russell Wilson and Sean Payton. Russell Wilson had a very disappointing first season in Denver, and there's no denying that. But with the pure talent of Russell Wilson and the coaching presence of Sean Payton, the Broncos are bound to figure it out.